Welcome to the It's Our Life's Work podcast, brought to you by Opus Vitae Construction here in Portland, Oregon.
Welcome to episode 11 of It's Our Life's Work podcast. We're here with two very distinguished guests, one more than the other.
We'll let you decide who that is.
Exactly. Ben with Weekend Plumber is joining us. And your name again? Oh, that's right. You're Bryan Montagna with Avery Architecture. So,
it's important that we know, Kevin, that the honor is definitely split 50-50 between us. And
oh yeah,
it's not just you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bryan, for that. Whatever it was. So Ben, your company, Weekend Plumber. You only work on the weekends?
No, it was a sneaky way to start a business.
Please share.
Yeah, when it was actually when my wife was pregnant with our second, she was on bed rest. Like there was complications with the pregnancy, and so I used all my vacation days, and we had our kids are only 16 months apart, so we had barely a toddler at the time, and after using all my vacation, I'm like, man, we have to figure something out really quickly. Yeah. And so her mom lived with us, which was interesting.
Fun, I'm sure.
And then on the weekends, I worked for myself, and I named it Weekend Plumber. And when I had enough clients, I stopped working for my former employer.
Okay.
And I kept the name, but I work. It's Weekend Plumber now because I'm working for the weekends. Kind of like
the opposite.
Yeah, but I still have like some people in our service department will still work weekends, but that's how I got the name. I actually was driving to the beach and was thinking like, man, it'd be so great to only work the weekends. But and that's, that is how it started. But after my kids got to a certain age, it was like, man, I'm never going to see my kids if I don't,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a great adventure.
Wonderful. Go
ahead.
Oh, okay.
This is twice in a couple of the last podcasts that we've started off this way. A little bit of a hitch.
Well, you know what, Paul? You go ahead and ask your question.
Wow.
No, I take that back. I'll just no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
This is Kevin's question. Should we pay any attention to plumbing? What do you even mean by this question, Kevin?
What I mean by that question, Paul, is that I think it's one of the trades that isn't paid attention to a lot.
Yeah.
And there's just an assumption that the plumber is going to show up and just do what he does. Who cares? Like, does it matter? Does it impact anything? Most people would probably say no.
Yeah.
Until their faucets don't turn on.
Right.
Well, but I guess I'm talking more about not necessarily the things that you touch, but the infrastructure of plumbing underneath, the things that are behind walls and ceilings, underground, whatever, that, done poorly can have some pretty big impacts. And Ben, I know that you probably have seen some things that you can point to where things done poorly do have impact.
Yeah. I think...
Are you biased to plumbing, by the way?
Not specifically, but with architecture and with building, in my opinion, you guys have been able... there's different classes, and you can either hire, an architect that may work out of his basement, or a builder who has a van and a clipboard, all the way up to, premium style folks. And I think the interesting part about, most trades is that slightly less than mediocrity is kind of the norm, unfortunately, because there's more work, I think, still than there are tradespeople. And so when someone makes a phone call, they're not expecting much. They just want things to get turned back on and that person to leave as soon as they can. And so I think trying to be a tradesperson who cares is what we're trying to do. You know, to care about anything from how, making sure the plumbing's going to last for the life of the home, making sure that a homeowner knows how to turn things off when it's freezing, even caring about, when we're roughing in, if there's a certain grout line, knowing that, like, hey, we need to make this pot filler or this shower valve easily adjustable so that when the tile guys come, we can move things around a little bit. So I think it matters a lot, and I'm trying to build a company of people that care. I think that's why we should pay attention to plumbing or any phase of building, because for most people, it's their biggest asset or one of their biggest assets.
So one of the questions that I'd follow up with that is, you establish, like, there's a sort of mediocrity level, and slightly below that is kind of commonplace or acceptable. What does it look like, and why would you be propelled to offer something that's significantly higher? What would that look like?
Like examples of what the different systems or materials?
Anything that would, so we're all looking for differentiators. Like, what differentiates one part of construction from another way of doing it? So what would differentiate the kind of plumbing you're trying to do or company you're trying to form?
Yeah, I think from either the first phone call or the first time that we walk in, I want the client, whether it's the architect, the builder, or just the homeowner, to know, like, almost exhale, and be like, man, we hired the right folks. That means a lot to me. That, and it can be something as simple as calling someone back on a Sunday if their water service is broke, or putting floor protection down, or if we're working on finish, putting, making sure the countertops are covered. If it's working with the general, it's making sure that we have, like, we set up a whiteboard so that there's an open line of communication. It doesn't mean things don't still get lost. I mean, we still make mistakes sometimes, but
I didn't know we could write on those.
yeah, absolutely.
Careful with Kevin. Whiteboards, yeah.
Yeah, I thought there was just
No. Drew has been writing on.
Has he really?
Yeah, he's doing great.
Wow.
So it's just to make sure, because so many things get forgotten. So I think that it's not just about communication. It's almost when you go to your dentist and you don't even know maybe if he's having a bad day, because when you come in, he's talking to you. He's asking you questions about your life. He seems like he's just doing fantastic. He can't wait to see you. And I think that's what we're hoping for, is to, if we're on the job, we want people to know we care. And then we're trying to move from tradespeople to craftspeople as best we can. So if there is a way that we could either build something better or work with the client better, we try that as much as we can.
Yeah.
I love that line of trades to crafts.
The
same thing that emphasizes a very different quality of the profession, and it's the care, I think, that you were speaking to.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It doesn't. It's real weird right now in the trades, because if you build your company to a certain amount, you can sell it to a conglomerate.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Kevin's got an entirely different idea about what to do at Opus now.
And so
Kidding.
the bummer is, though, it's just you're selling it to someone who's not in the trades and definitely not a crafts person.
Right.
And so right away, people are getting a different experience.
We actually, one of the HVAC installer companies that we used in the past did that.
Yeah.
It was a small firm, and then they sold out to some big company, and the same people are still there. Prices went up, but the whole thing feels different.
Yeah.
and it is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually don't really interact with them much anymore because of that.
Right. I think plumbing is something where emergencies come up.
Mm-hmm.
And when that emergency happens, if they know they can call someone, and even if it's inconvenient, that person answers the phone
Yeah.
or gets back to them as soon as they can, it goes a long way.
Now, is it true, Ben, that all plumbers expose their butt crack on the job site?
About half.
So it's 50%? Okay.
No, man, I mean, we are bent over a lot. We're on our knees a lot. In fact, I'm almost 50, but I have like wrestling knee pads underneath that I pull up so that I
Nice.
can make sure that I still have mobility as I get older. So, yeah, we're not standing straight up the whole day. So you never know what you're going to see, unfortunately. But we get long T-shirts to help with that.
It's kind of scary after a little while of hanging out with a person. You start to know when the question like this is coming. Just based on body language and like excitement levels.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Like, Brian, you probably know this also. I'm hanging out with Kevin a little bit here recently.
Yeah, excitement levels.
Yeah, it goes up, and you're like, what am I facing?
What am
now?
What am I in for?
Yeah, exactly. Start watching for it.
That's funny. So I have a fun story about a buddy of mine that's a plumber. And when he graduated high school, he went to work as an apprentice, like right after high school. And so he's been doing it a long time. And he said to me, he goes, Kevin, my first day on the job, the journeyman that he was working with said to him, he's like, it's really simple. He goes, plumbing is simple. There's 3 things you got to know. First, payday's on Friday. Second, crap rolls downhill. Third, don't chew your fingernails. And he's like, that's it. That's plumbing. And that was just so funny to me. I thought that was great. So feel free to laugh, Brian.
That is something.
Waiting for
That's something.
reaction to
That's something people still say. Like,
that right?
yeah, payday's on Friday, crap rolls downhill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You haven't heard the fingernails part?
The fingernails part, like I'm always leery when I go to suppliers because there's samples of just new tools or new parts on the counter.
Yeah.
And plumbers don't believe things are real till they grab them. And so all of our dirty ass hands
Yeah, go all over the tools.
have like touched all these things with the supplier, but we can't help it.
Yeah.
Like I know how dirty it is, but I still had to put my hand on it. But no, if you are someone who washes your hands before you go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
that is a good yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, that's a good indication that you might be a plumber.
So one interesting thing, your introduction to Opus was probably a kind of you got exposed to some things that you probably haven't seen right away out of the gate, and a lot of that's thanks to Brian.
Yeah.
So soup to nuts, he's trying to design better structures. And so when you're asked to come in and look at the Keats project or Kevin's project, those projects are different than a lot of other projects.
Yeah.
What is your thought process when you see something like that? Does that excite you?
Oh my gosh.
I'll tell you, he was excited. No, and I mean, it was really awesome because he got back to me like right away and just said, I don't even think you had anything like specific yet because we had just looked at the project.
Yeah.
And you were just saying like, I'm really excited and honored to be a part of this. Like it felt meaningful. And that came through to me. So that was, I thought, awesome. Just to have presented something where we have all of these different goals in mind, but one of them absolutely is to get buy-in from the people that are doing it, whether it's contractors and anyone that's on the job. But it was still, it's mixed between who resonates with different things, and you clearly did. And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, I was excited about it. I could tell something more was going on, that you were trying to not just try something new, but try something that mattered to you in a way that could really affect whoever chose to be a part of it. And this could be something people look back on and are like, hey, I know the guys that built the first one of those in Portland, or I know the team that got this whole thing started. Because I do think there is definitely going to be a luxury home aspect to it, but there could also be this awesome everyday. I mean, it could change how people live or what they think about
Yeah.
when they think home.
Yep.
It's awesome.
One question for you, Ben, about that. When you're encountering a new something that you haven't before, like you are on both of these projects, where there's a whole lot of focus in plumbing on plumbing fixtures, but not on the systems themselves. How common would you say it is for you to get brought in and asked about collaborative problem solving with the whole team before the project starts? Like you are sort of forced to in these projects.
Right.
In as it relates to the system of
Yeah, as the
plumbing,
system
not
of
the
plumbing.
fixtures.
Yeah.
I think most of our projects have a collaborative feel,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the first time that I got to meet the architect right off the bat, which was really cool because there is a disconnect. You know, sometimes people think of architects as the people with the ideas, but they're not really caring how they might affect what the people on the ground are doing.
Yeah.
To where this just felt like, hey man, we're on the same team and we're gonna try to do this thing. And
I mean, Bryan is really great about that. He definitely is like the people's architect.
yeah,
He doesn't like be like, no, it's my ideas and y'all just make it happen. He wants to know and understand and adapt to the reality of the situations and the feedback and stuff. So I have to give him a compliment for that.
yeah,
I think it's a realization that continues to be further fulfilled the more I get into this field of how complex things are. And architects are surrounded by experts in all of these different pieces of it. And you're an expert in the plumbing system, and yet so often you're moved to this position of executing something, and you're not involved in the design aspect of it or the weighing the pros and cons of, because there's things to consider.
yeah,
And or that might happen, that conversation happens once all of the framing is already up and we're limited in certain ways and other systems are already put in there. And I think there's so much to gain from these conversations earlier on, and it doesn't take away all of the problems with. I mean, we started with goals, and I share with you things that I was really trying to do and you were excited about. We've then worked through. You've looked at some different systems for us and given your insight as to like these are the different things to consider within that. I mean, the cost of it, like the performance of it, how long things are going to last, how they integrate in with other things that we're trying to do, and from that, as this team of people that are working on this project, hopefully we're making a better informed decision earlier on so that the things we're doing aren't then getting undone later.
yeah.
Bryan, in your process when you're designing, at what point would you say you start wanting to have conversations with people like trades who are specifically got their hands on?
I think there's two different pieces of it. There's one where I want to have a relationship with the people that I'm going to be working with, hopefully often, so that I can actually go to Ben and say, hey, I'm working on this project. There's a condition that like we're trying to, like the clients ask for this thing, or there's something that I'm interested in doing. Can you give me like have a quick call, or just like give me your insight on that? Is that going to be something that's super problematic and I haven't thought about it? Or is it something like, you know, I've done that before, we can solve that, but these are the things you need to know up front. And so there's that piece of it. And then once we have the schematic design, like a concept laid out, so that the space planning, we know general things that the client is excited about. I want to then take it to, I mean, I love working with contractors early so that we, during that construction, what is it called? Reconstruction process. We get to actually work through a lot of those things and then relay that to the client so that they understand. I mean, ultimately they may make decisions that are not, you know, the most efficient for the plumbing system. That's fine if they understand what they're doing and there's a real reason for it, so that Ben can say, all right, there's going to be a premium to this, because there's times when that makes sense. Like, yes, you're going to put extra money into something because you're getting a benefit out of it, but they need to understand what that benefit is.
Yeah. There's an interesting economics to different each different kind of approach to construction. So our approach to construction is that we like to plan ahead and think through things before we get them under contract. Well, from your perspective, that has a financial component to it because you're not under contract until we're under contract. But in some ways, you're giving of your time and your expertise to be able to talk to someone like Bryan during the pre-construction life cycle. How does that feel to you, and why are you willing to do that?
I hadn't thought about that or
take it back.
yeah. Like
Dang it, Paul.
well,
Oh,
yeah,
dang it.
like the cost of I don't know the admin cost or the cost underneath, but I think it's always worth the risk of investing in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like this could be, I think it already is something great, and who knows where it's going to go. And I think that you can tell kind of early on, sometimes we'll be asked to come in and help design or bid a system, and they're just using either our knowledge or our numbers or something like that. There's definite usury, but I always think it's worth trying, and then it gets weeded out pretty quickly if you know someone is not in it for the long haul. Yeah, well, this was definitely worth the risk.
Yeah.
So
Well, for us though, the idea is that, we use the same subtrades on every project.
Yeah.
So when you're given of your time during pre-construction, you're going to get it on the backside when you get the project, because we're not bidding you against somebody else. We're not talking to two plumbers. It's your project. It's expected that you're going to do the work. And so the pre-con is just a piece of it. And hopefully you factor that into your price so that, you're not working for free. Because that's not our interest, is to have people work for free.
and it would save time if you're on a team. It's going to save time on the back end if you're meeting on because there's always more design or always something to work through. And if we can do it at the beginning, at least take care of some of the issues.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's way easier. But I'm going to circle back around to the plumbing system, because I think that it's pretty paid attention to unless there's a problem. Right. And, like one of the things that is somewhat regional to at least the West Coast is the use of ABS pipe for waste lines, even under slab. And I'm a big advocate, as you well know, of PVC for under a slab, because it is a solid core. It's got lots of testing done in a non-pressurized PVC system underground where it's not exposed to UV to go 100, 150 years easy. That matters to me a lot, because when we're putting something under a slab, you're not wanting to take that slab up to redo something. So it has to be like bulletproof as all get out. And that's our perspective. But how many other companies you interact with think like that or are concerned about those things?
Commercially, sometimes we have to put in PVC. It'll just be spec'd on the job. But I think typically there aren't a lot of companies giving thought to how long something's going to last, because they're just trying to get a beautiful end product and get paid for that product. So even just having the conversation is a step in the right direction of like, hey, we're not just building this for you, we're building it for who you're going to sell it to.
Or who inherits it or
right?
whatever.
So but no, it's pretty rare. Typically people just want to make sure, and that's back to the mediocrity thing. Is your like plumbing to code or designing to code, that's like it's where you start. It's not like that where you end.
Right. It's not your goal.
Yeah, like
To just barely hit it, or maybe just a little under, and hopefully the inspector doesn't notice.
yeah, like you're trying to like, well, what's the way we can do this the best?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is really important for any long-term partnership or relationship,
For
or
sure.
even if it's just the relationship between a client and a tradesperson.
Right. But another thing that I think gets overlooked a little bit is how a house is plumbed can impact energy efficiency.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't see how those two can overlap. Just the simple fact of insulating your hot water lines everywhere in the house can make a big cost savings over time. It's not like every month you're going to be like, look, we saved $50. But over, 20, 30, 40 years of your time in that house, it does amount to something that's real, that costs very little initially.
For sure.
And, we pay attention to those things because we care so deeply. And to us, building a house is not just about how it looks on the outside. It's more about what's underneath and on the inside that gives people long-term value than just the shiny stuff on the surface. And I think our industry is really geared at plumbing being fixtures up.
Yeah.
Like everything's about the shiny stuff you
For
touch.
sure.
Who cares what's happening behind that? It doesn't matter as long as it's not leaking.
Yeah.
And that's such an unfortunate way to look at things. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. I think it is important to be working together as best we can for the longest term result.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it is a luxury home that sprawls out or a smaller place where you're trying to build something that hey, every family could be in one of these, where Bryan had designed the house where basically all the plumbing is in one area.
Mm-hmm.
That's important too, because that's another kind of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You wouldn't need a recirc line if all of the fixtures are right together, because they would be recirculating the water by themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that that design and execution are both really important parts of trying to build something better.
Oh, good, Bryan.
I was going to ask, Ben, if you could speak to some of the different types of plumbing systems relating to their quality on the water quality and health impacts for the occupant.
And you're talking about supply line, water supply lines?
Water supply lines, just the different options that people have out there and things to consider when weighing those options with respect to health.
I think that there are probably CPVC, which got put in when people were replacing their galvanized.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably the worst, not just because it is a brittle product, but because it is a plastic product with glue and off-gassing. So I think that
So don't do that.
that would be the. But I was on vacation in Mexico and they're advertising it.
Really?
Like it's on a billboard.
Really?
PVC pipe.
Wow.
So it is interesting. And then
It's amazing.
yeah, but I think that PEX and copper. I'm curious about both of those. I think they're both a premium product in different ways. I think with PEX, you're using less fittings. It is
Because of the flexibility.
because of the flexibility, it can expand and contract. So there's, the freeze risk is very low. And then with copper, that's already something in our bodies. So, but we have to be careful with copper because of it will wear out. Like it can get thin if for example, if you recirc a copper line without a timer or aquastat, it just becomes paper thin, and then you have leaks. But in terms of the health, I think both PEX and copper are the two, I would call them top products, but I think there's things we're probably still going to have to learn about both of those.
What about with the different options for joining copper? So you're not using something, if the copper itself is healthy and has these benefits, but the connections then have something that's not healthy in it.
Right. So if you are soldering, you got to use without lead for sure, and flux that has no lead either. But then there's also a way to join it mechanically, and that, I think that's a new commercial standard. So it's kind of like a press product, to where you're
is a gasket over the copper that's being
yes, a gasket over the copper, and then that gasket gets compressed. The copper pipe doesn't get compressed, but the gasket in the fitting does. So
What's that gasket made of?
the gasket's made out of rubber, but the fitting is copper.
Yeah. Because whenever I hear something like that, my mind goes to, well, if it's rubber, it's gonna get brittle over time, and then
Yeah.
it's gonna leak.
This is the new commercial standard, Kevin.
Yeah.
I don't care. People have been wrong in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that we can't look into the future, unfortunately. Like, we just have to look at the products that are out there, look at their track records and warranties, and do the best that we can. Like, I think that right now I feel like there's advantages to both copper and PEX. But I don't know, like, hey, will these last 100 years? Because neither one of them have been around yet 100 years.
With regards to the lead component in when you're soldering, is that readily available without? I'm just surprised almost that it even would be allowed to have it in there anymore.
Oh no, it's readily available without now.
And it doesn't impact how you're I mean, there's not a functional difference then in the end product.
No.
Okay.
No.
And what about with that mechanical system? Are there disadvantages in terms of you can only join it in certain ways, and therefore you have to consider, certain connections are not an option to you, so you have to consider things differently from the design perspective?
No, you can pretty much join it in the same way. Like, we could do a system in copper, whether it's sweat or mechanical. The mechanical piece is really nice for repairing, because with soldering you have to.
Kevin might like that. See,
You have to.
he doesn't
wait.
like to be open-minded on camera, but then there's
Yeah.
another side of him.
The-
He will research this until about 10 a.m., which is super late for him.
yeah.
Get back here in the morning.
No. Yeah, I think we have to just do our best and see what is out there and try to make the best informed decisions that we can.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's true with everything, but I think we also can take history as our teacher to inform what we put trust in and what we don't.
Yeah.
And I have yet to know of any rubber gasket that lasts longer than probably about 20 years under pressure.
Yeah.
And so that's always gives me pause for concern. It's like the shark bite fittings.
Right?
It's like,
There's
no, those are approved for buried in wall. And it's like, man,
Yeah.
I just have to believe that's going to fail at some
Yeah.
point.
We would not bury a shark bite in a wall, because there's a lot of expansion and contraction with, because usually it's for joining plastic to something else, and plastic will thermally expand and then shrink in just tremendous, compared to anything metallic. It is wild, and so that rubber seal would be under a lot of
Yeah.
Stress.
yeah.
Yeah, it's you know, I mean, it's like again, it goes back to how I think that plumbing gets overlooked as being somewhat simplistic, but it's not. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
You know, done well, it's very complicated. There's also the things to consider about water flow through a house, and
For sure.
you know, is that bathroom that's the furthest away from the water heater going to get adequate water flowing to it, and how long is it going to take for the water to get to temperature there? How much are you going to be wasting to get that to happen? And, you know, thinking through all those things and planning for it when you're doing your rough in. And typically plumbing systems are not designed by the architect or even by a mechanical engineer. It's possible to have it done, but it's very, very rare in the residential world. So
For sure.
it all comes down to the plumber doing it.
Right.
And, you know, if you don't have lots of experience, you're just kind of winging it and hoping that it's going to work.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
I currently live in a home that was plumbed by somebody that was of that mindset, where it was done as fast and cheap as possible. And there's like almost no water pressure at certain areas because way too many fittings were used and the size of the pipe was too small and stuff, and passed code.
Right.
And it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
It really is. But again, it's because not a lot of attention is put on that. Everybody just assumes that, you know, plumbing's plumbing, it'll all work out. And it doesn't. And there's more complexity to it than is realized. And I guess that's kind of somewhat of a common theme that comes of these podcasts, is to talk about the fact that things are not simple. There's complexity in everything we do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I guess, pressure to make things be simple and standardized and everything's the same. And it's just not the case. It's just not the case.
What is your process when you get a set of plans and actually have to begin that design of the system?
Well, we usually ask where the mechanical room is, because that is gonna tell us if we need, you know, a recirc pump, more than one recirc pump, which would be pretty rare.
Isn't it indicated on the plan where the mechanical room is, or?
Sometimes, but a lot of times a water heater won't even be drawn.
Exactly.
I usually just like to have a note that says there's a mechanical room somewhere in a really small space. Off-site.
It's going to be really hard to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, it's tricky, but so finding the mechanical room, water source, where it's going to exit, and then any structural concerns. A lot of time, if it's a retro situation, then we have to figure out if the joist will even support adding a bathroom, and if we can drill any holes through the existing joists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think major structural concerns are probably the first thing that we'll look at. Like, hey, do we need to put a soffit down here just to put a bathroom upstairs, and is that going to be acceptable?
Mm-hmm.
And then we go from there. But a lot of times people will be adding something and seeing if what they currently have, if the current infrastructure can handle it,
Mm-hmm.
is where we go first. Like, how big's the water meter? How many bathrooms is already existing in the house? And then we go from there.
And so what can, on the architectural side, what can they do to help you with your, you know, help you guys do better work?
I think, if it's possible, putting the water heater close to fixtures. Like at the Keats project, you know, the water heater's just right above everything. I think that is something. Having a mechanical room is also really great. So that
There's a low standard.
yeah,
Not that I want all of these things in the mechanical room. It's
Yeah.
like if it was just there.
Can I have a mechanical room?
yeah, just that's wonderful to just have one. And I think, you know, if we can figure out what walls will have, you know, drops in, so that we know if we can make grade to certain spots. You know, those would be the things that just come to mind.
So would it be helpful for you if when somebody's designing a new home, for example, that they've put some effort into calculating that there's going to be enough grade between this place and where the line's got to go out?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be great because people don't ideally want to put in like an ejector pump.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Like anything mechanical is a
Would fail.
yeah, where gravity, I mean, people's lines can still plug up, but gravity would be important. Much easier.
Isn't that rule number 2?
Yeah, it's rule number 2.
It is.
It goes down. It goes downhill.
Right.
So if you have to pump it uphill,
Yeah.
not that it's I mean, there's we do it when we have to, but I think especially if we're designing in an attic.
We're good to go now. Yeah. Okay. So designing in an attic.
I think especially if we're designing in an attic or a basement, that if we can keep the bathroom close to the existing, for example, in a basement, if the bathroom is close to where the sewer exists and not on the other side of the basement.
Do you on residential projects have plumbing design done for you ever, or very often?
No, commercially sometimes it is, but residentially, I've not ever seen a set of plans that will. And sometimes we may need to involve someone. If you have a really large house and they're expecting hot water to every fixture, then we would want to involve some type, an engineer, so that we know we're building something that is going to be able to keep the customer happy.
So would you prefer then to have that design done on most, I'm going to say custom homes, because obviously smaller projects, it's not really, it's much easier to figure out if it's a small footprint, but on a larger sort of complicated house, would you find a lot of benefit in that?
I think it would be important if you had a house with several wings to keep hot water and even water supply in general, whether it's hot or cold. I think it would it would be important to work with an engineer, because a plumber is going to oversize it just to cover himself, to where if an engineer got involved, he would be able to do the calculations to let us know, like, hey, you can use this size pipe with this size pump for this wing. And then also, or if the house is really tall, if water service is coming in the basement, but the house is 50 feet tall and you're losing pressure as you go up to the primary suite. It's a sad thing when people are disappointed at the end.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't, and you really can't fix it at that point.
No. Like it's a rough conversation.
It is. And it's funny because it kind of points a little bit towards vented crawl spaces. Because vented crawl spaces are a very common thing here on the West Coast. Like from a building science perspective, the worst thing you could possibly do. Okay. But the one thing that it has been good for is the fact that all of the poor quality workmanship and mechanical and plumbing can easily be changed out and fixed, because you have access underneath your house. And that's crazy to me, right? That like people are like, no, crawl spaces are good because it allows us to keep fixing stuff that was done poorly to begin with. Or we didn't really have to do a good job the first time because we have the ability to go in there and fix it later if it's a problem. Yeah. It's like, what the heck? Like, who thinks like that?
I think, I don't know, is it cheaper to build a crawl space than it is to put something on slab? I mean, definitely cheaper. A crawl space is definitely cheaper than a basement.
I mean, if you're just doing code minimum, yeah, crawl space is the cheapest. If you're conditioning that crawl space, you're going to spend quite a bit of money,
Okay.
and
Which is-
it's probably on par with just doing a slab and no crawl space. But when you're doing a slab without a crawl space, you got to get things right the first time,
Absolutely.
and you got to have situations set up so that if you have a water supply line failure, you can pull it out and put a new one right in its place, which I think is just the right way to do things.
Yeah. I think it would be hard to account for technology sometimes, though. If you're, you would want to go with something really proven if you're doing slab, like with your air handling, to where if you're doing air handling in a crawl space, you can do whatever you want because you're not worried about the long term. But man, you almost would want to use proven cutting edge if you're putting stuff on slab.
Well,
but not too new because you want to make sure it.
Test it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's got some longevity in the marketplace. But I mean, if we're doing a slab and no crawl space, then all of your HVAC is going to happen from above and not on the floor. And the cool thing about the mini split systems is that you're not moving air across big distances. You're moving refrigerant from a condenser to the service head, if you will. And so that's very efficient, requires just a little bit of space. And I still don't love the fact that, conditioning air is like the worst way you can condition a home other than cooling.
Yeah.
Just because, air loses its heat very, very fast. And it's not super comfortable to sit there and have air blowing over you. Even if it's warm, it's still like weird. But, I mean, like if that's all your option, if that's your options is to heat and cool that way, then, that's what you're doing and everything's going to be overhead. It's not going to be underneath the slab. So
How would you, so with in-floor heat, ideally that's how you would do, so you have radiant.
Yes.
What would you use for cooling then?
So either,
because it would condense. You can't use cold water.
well, so you can.
It may not work as well.
You can. And here where we have low humidity, it's not a big deal. Places where there's high humidity and they try and use like a radiant cooling system, they do have issues with humidity and stuff. Here it can be done. The problem is that there's really not a great system yet to cool that water and move it through. And there's also some concern about its effect, like its efficacy, because, heat rises, right? And if you're cooling down here, yes, there's some benefit to it. The long answer is I don't know. I don't know what the best scenario is. Typically, if we're doing radiant floor heat system, we're cooling with like a mini split system from above.
Okay.
Because that is the most effective way, is to cool from above down. And it's probably the most cost-effective way to do it.
All right.
We've talked to firms who design systems that have tried putting a radiant cooling system on the ceiling so that the cooling is raining down on you because that's the way it works. We just have, as we try to take that system apart in our head and think about it, it seems like there's quite a few problems inherent in putting a cooling system up behind drywall and light fixtures and other things on the ceiling with water moving through.
Wow, yeah, that does sound...
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in all of these cases, you end up with a situation where the mini split technology, which has gotten pretty good and is doing both heating and cooling within the same system, now has to be broken into either a radiant heating and a radiant cooling system, or a radiant heating system that then also still has that same infrastructure for the mini split for cooling. And so from that cost perspective, it makes it tough to...
Yeah. But, I mean, I think that, there will be advances in that to where I think that like in our climate, you can potentially radiant cool enough, especially if your house is really thermally efficient. Then it requires very little cooling to actually cool it down. But I don't know. We'll see. The other side of that, though, is that typically people treat their air conditioner in their house kind of like their car, where they wait till they get hot and then they flip it on all full blast and hope it just cools you down.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really work that way in a house. You really need to just turn it on and leave it do its thing. So it's sort of not battling at the heat of the day. It's conditioning the whole entire time. In a really thermally efficient home, you should need very little air conditioning typically, unless you are having a party and there's tons of people, or it's a summer evening and you've opened up all the windows and doors and the house got hot and now you got to find a way to cool it out. Because, if your house is really thermally efficient and it gets hot and you close it, guess what happens? It holds the heat.
Yeah.
So you have to have a way to cool it back down. So it's complicated.
Is that why you use those special bricks
It's part of it, yeah.
to make the house just
I mean, the Faz wall, which is a
They're magical bricks. Is
magical
what we call
brick.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a bunch of properties, but one of them, is that it has the mass wall system will help moderate the temperature within the building. So it has insulation in it, so that it's forming the enclosure system to prevent loss of heat. But that insulation is on the outside of the mass, and so that mass will actually absorb the excess heat when it's hot and then radiate it when it's cool. So it's moderating the temperature so that your system for heating and cooling, whatever it is, in our case that's a mini split system, has less work to do. And then combined with shading and orientation, I mean, all of those are things that were very common in any vernacular architecture, that you had to take those into account based off of your climate and your region. We do it less now because we have the ability to overpower things through mechanical systems. And we should use mechanical systems when they're appropriate to use it, but we should also just not forget about the passive aspects that, and like with anything, it's that gravity aspect that we were talking about earlier. We can always put pumps to circumvent that when we need to. And a lot of times they may be good to have those as a fail-safe in situations where you just don't want to have like flooding. But we should always, I think, start from the standpoint of, we know how this is going to work passively. Let's try to design it that way. And so if you're coming to us and saying, all I need to know are like the different heights of things so that I can, just run the calculations as to like, do we have enough of to make those runs possible? And if you don't, it's like, all right, well, we can actually change some of these around because you flip something, maybe you just move it a little. It's like the bathroom is oriented. We can flip things to the other side, and all of a sudden that's a 6 foot different, and that would allow you to not have to use that pump.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like, you're just preventing something from maybe happening, and that whole system is more resilient.
Yeah.
Because gravity is always going to work. And heat's always going to rise. Like all these principles that are the foundations to like how we're unpacking designing within the realm of building science are where you always start, ideally, and then you're adding mechanical things on top of that when necessary if it doesn't quite get there.
Right. And the idea is that your mechanical systems are used sparingly because they're expensive. They're expensive to use.
Yeah.
Right. Like I had a carpenter working on a project that spent 2 weeks this summer in Germany, where his wife is from. And he came back and he's like, Kevin, they build there like you are building here. And he goes, but they have to, because the cost of energy is so expensive that like every dollar you spend to save energy costs in the future is like worth it. And that's the way they approach things there, because they have to, right? Here, energy is affordable enough that it's not a have to, but just think if we collectively all did that, how much further the resources we do have would go. And to me, that's what it's all about. It's about making your holding costs of that home lower and not burning energy just because you can.
Right.
Like we could build the crappiest draftiest, most energy efficient house known to man and put a kick-ass AC system in there, you'll be cool all summer long.
Right.
But at what cost?
Yeah.
In not only to your own cost, but you're like burning up all of this energy that somebody else could use that really needs it for something, right? And you're just doing it just because you want to. Or some of the net zero projects where it's like, oh, all we have to do is generate more electricity than the house burns. Well, I mean, I can put a nuclear reactor in and like burn all the energy I want.
There you
Like
go.
I'm still net zero. And so when, those extremes show the silliness sometimes in some of these situations. And I think it's important that we have the technology and the know-how. Why don't we make our mechanical systems in our home construction such that they burn as little energy as possible?
Yeah.
That just makes good sense for everybody.
Well, that goes back to the crawl space thing, like, and the magical brick thing. Because if you're building the enough mass to keep a temperature, and that's just the design of the building,
Right.
that's so cool.
It is. Because, I mean, we know that the principles that exist in nature and physics and all that stuff, they're always true.
Right.
So why not work with them instead of against them?
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason that things like passive house that came out of Germany emphasized not only like the airtightness of a house, but also the energy consumption of a house is for the reasons that Kevin was suggesting, which is why on a passive house, we might have to design systems like plumbing systems or electrical systems because we have to be efficient in our use of those systems. So if you're delivering hot water, for example, having someone help you understand what's the best pipe size to get from point A to point B so that you have less heat loss across the plastic or the copper. But there are very few projects that have those sort of demands where we're caring about those things in that way. It's just left up to you to figure.
Yeah. And, and you're just guessing.
Right.
It's an educated guess. You've got years of experience, but still it's just guessing.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, we have code books, but even the code would be oversized compared to the engineered.
Right.
Yes.
Like when the Rose Garden got plumbed, or the Moda Center or whatever it is now, an engineer did that. If a regular plumber would have done it, the plumbing system itself would have probably been like 4 or 5, maybe 10 times as much if you're plumbing from your book rather than an engineered system. So I think that's probably the future of plumbing is some of the system being pre-engineered for like reclaimed water to where you're using a pre-built system for your reclaimed. And that way you're reusing the water. The water's getting filtered from your waste and then going into whatever, your garden or your laundry or your toilets. But things like that to where they don't come easy in plumbing. Right. Like we use LED lights everywhere now. Like plumbing is still basically the same as it was like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Our materials are slightly different, but in terms of energy, we're just starting.
Have you had experience with some of the energy reclaiming systems within plumbing, and what has your experience been?
We've done a couple of those hydro loops, but they're so new, and they're designed for Germany. They're designed for Europe, and so some of these things are going to take a commitment from just your regular homeowner to use water differently and to use your plumbing system differently because you almost need to make a choice if you're going to, it's like a ecological choice. something like that. And early adopters spend the most money. So it's pretty rare that people build a reclaim system because the plumbing costs are humongous.
Yeah.
They are. And the part about the homeowner having to be part of that system is the tough one.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't want to mess with that, right? You
No.
come home, long day, kids need fed and all that stuff. And the last thing you want to do is like, all right, now I've got to use this plumbing system in such a way that,
Right.
that's just a reality. And I think that we can't change that reality across the board, quite honestly. And that's why I think some of those systems sort of don't work very well here.
No. I mean,
Is the Hydroloop system, is that the one that has the copper wrapped around the supply or the waste lines from the shower so that you regain some of the heat?
I don't think so.
no, but I put we've done some of
Okay.
those too, and it actually does help. But again, it's an investment in being ecological, because then we have to take wherever that product that you're talking about, wherever the heat exchanger part goes, and then plumb it all the way back to the water heater.
Mm-hmm.
So
So you end up with a lot of lines that are going back and forth between the same
yes,
places. Yeah.
Yeah, and if there's a long distance, you lose the heat ultimately.
but the
Yeah.
one I was referring to is a reclaim water
Okay.
product, to where it's a holding tank and purifier in one, and you would put your wastewater into it, and then it gets purified and then pumped to either your toilets or your laundry or hoses.
And so, Ben, is it taking the black water or the gray water?
Gray.
It's taking gray and using it
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
no, it's taking the wastewater and basically turning it into
Not potable,
not potable,
but
yeah.
reclaimed
yeah.
is what.
Right. Yeah.
You
The
couldn't.
black water always stays.
Stays black. But
Well, I wanted to make that distinction
Yeah.
so that, the audience back home could.
It's like
Understand.
if you want to wash your clothes, you just have to flush your toilet beforehand.
well, they had, which is really cool. But again,
Great
like
use of water. yeah.
you're saying, it would be such an adjustment. But I think it's still around. But there was a toilet that when you flushed it, when it filled into a basin at the top of the toilet. So if you were to think about your morning routine, when you flush your toilet, you could brush your teeth, but you would really have to think about it. Like as your toilet
Am
filled.
I making
Yes.
your teeth cleaner?
So it is hard. We've gotten used to a certain standard.
I mean, they
Yeah.
they have the ones that have the sinks above the toilets,
Right.
Which I think is like a great idea, but at least the ones that are integrated, you're like straddling the toilet
Yes.
to wash your hands.
You got it. Yep.
And it's really not, a pleasant.
No, that's not a pleasant experience. I think one of the best ways, as far as reclaim water, is to get it outside to irrigate your garden
Yes.
or your yard with. That just makes the most sense. There's like nothing that can really go wrong with that. I think when you have special plumbing systems that take like gray water and then funnel it to non-potable areas, I just have this envision of like, 20 years later, somebody comes out to remodel the house and they just grab one of those lines and take it
Right.
somewhere else.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's just the reality, because
That's
you
the
can't
reality.
see what's behind
Well,
the walls.
even the most recent home we did that in
Yeah.
was for someone, for a premium client, and they're having bidets,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to let them know that we have to double supply each toilet if you want the reclaimed water, because we wouldn't want reclaimed water
Yeah.
being used for your bidet,
For your bidet seat. Yeah.
right? Because you could get itchy.
That's a nice way to put it.
Because it's not as
Not clean.
Right.
But that was us having to think of.
Yeah.
They didn't say that in the design. We read the literature.
Right.
They're not even thinking about, like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, I think this is the end of episode 11. It all rolls downhill. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
This is first. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on our episode today. We had a lot of fun talking with our guests. We really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be looking forward to you when our next content comes out.